on how important it was for you to be a partaker of the grace and the anointing that abides on our life and in ministry.
Ever wonder what hides behind the polished smiles, the tailored suits, and the thundering sermons of America's most controversial televangelists? Pastor Creflo Dollar built a ministry that stretches across continents, drew tens of thousands of followers into a single Georgia sanctuary, and amassed a personal fortune that most executives would envy. But behind the gleaming world dome, behind the primetime television broadcasts, and deep inside the record of his ministry's finances, lay details that would eventually leave the entire country speechless. This is the story no one fully told. The man behind the ministry, who Creflo Dollar really is. Creflo Augustus Dollar Jr. was born on January 28, 1962, in College Park, Georgia, a suburb of Atlanta that would later become the headquarters of everything he built. His name alone carried weight before he ever stepped into a pulpit. Growing up in the South, Dollar showed an early interest in the church, but his path to ministry was not a straight line. He attended West Georgia College in Carrollton, where he earned a bachelor's degree in education in 1984. Those academic years shaped a communicator who understood how to hold a room, how to structure an argument, and how to turn an ordinary idea into something that landed with force. In 1986, Dollar took that ability and pointed it towards something far larger than a classroom. He launched his very first worship service in the cafeteria of Kathleen Mitchell Elementary School in College Park, Georgia, with just 8 people seated before him. From that modest beginning, the numbers climbed at a pace that surprised even those who watched it happen. The congregation grew week by week, month by month, and eventually the small gathering required a far more serious home. The ministry was renamed World Changers Church International, and by December 1995 it had moved into the World Dome, an 8,500-seat facility that the church itself says was constructed for nearly $20 million without a single dollar borrowed from a bank. That detail became a foundational piece of Dollar's public image. Here was a man who taught financial blessing and built his own cathedral to prove the concept worked. The message and the architecture reinforced each other perfectly. Dollar's theology belonged to what is commonly called the Word of Faith movement, and more specifically, the prosperity gospel, a teaching that holds financial blessing and physical well-being as divine promises available to believers who give faithfully and speak with sufficient conviction. For decades, this was the engine of everything Dollar touched. Sermons drew enormous crowds. Television broadcasts carried his voice into living rooms across the United States and beyond. His daily program, Changing Your World, became one of the most widely distributed religious broadcasts on the continent. By 2007, World Changers Church International reported approximately 30,000 members and disclosed, in response to external pressure, that the organization had brought in roughly $69 million in gross cash revenue for the year 2006 alone. That figure stopped people. A ministry built on the idea of giving had itself become an operation generating tens of millions of dollars annually. The number raised questions that would not go away quietly. Dollar also expanded beyond the Sunday service. He founded Arrow Records, a music label operating under the ministry's umbrella. He authored numerous books, including titles like The Anointing to Live, Understanding God's Purpose for the Anointing, and The Holy Spirit, Your Financial Advisor, each one reinforcing the theological framework that made him famous. He launched Creflo Dollar Ministries and the Creflo Dollar Ministerial Association, building an interlocking network of organizations that extended his reach into conferences, publishing, and international outreach. His wife, Taffy Dollar, stood beside him throughout this expansion. Together, they raised 5 children in the Atlanta area, maintaining a family profile that complemented the pastoral image Dollar projected from the pulpit every week. On the surface, the picture looked exactly like the blessing he preached. A man who started with 8 people in a school cafeteria had, within 2 decades, built something that looked less like a church and more like a corporation. But what waited inside the finances of that corporation, and what the public would eventually learn about the gap between the prosperity gospel's promises and the reality of who benefited most from those promises, was far more complicated than any Sunday morning sermon ever suggested. The details that investigators and journalists would piece together over the following years painted a portrait of a ministry that kept its books sealed, its pastor's salary hidden, and its most controversial purchases far from the prying eyes of the faithful who funded it all. And the full story of what lived inside that study was only beginning to surface. The hidden finances, what investigators uncovered. Shifting from the story of Dollar's rise to the scrutiny that followed it, the picture changes sharply. For all the talk of blessing and abundance that filled World Changers Church International every weekend, the financial inner workings of that ministry were treated as something close to a state secret. Followers were told regularly that giving produced blessing. What they were rarely told was exactly what happened to the money after it left their hands. The first organized attempt to find out came in November 2007, when United States Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa, then serving as the ranking member of the Senate Finance Committee, launched a formal investigation into the financial practices of 6 major televangelists. The committee sent pointed questionnaires to the ministries of Dollar, Kenneth Copeland, Benny Hinn, Eddie Long, Paula White, and Joyce Meyer, requesting detailed information about salaries, benefits, travel expenses, and the personal use of church-owned assets. The stated concern was clear. American taxpayers subsidize tax-exempt religious organizations, and those organizations owe a basic standard of transparency to the public. Dollar's response was immediate and revealing. Rather than open his ministry's books, he instructed his attorney to write to Grassley's office and argue that the Senate Finance Committee had no jurisdiction over religious groups. Dollar's legal team asked the senator to either refer the matter to the Internal Revenue Service or obtain a formal subpoena, effectively daring the committee to escalate before he would cooperate. The request for confidentiality and the insistence on alternative channels suggested strongly that Dollar had something worth protecting inside those financial records. The investigation dragged on for years. Grassley's staff noted in their final report that witnesses feared retaliation if they spoke publicly, which hampered the committee's ability to gather testimony. When the probe concluded in 2011, no penalties or formal charges were filed, but the committee's report criticized the serious lack of financial accountability found across the ministries under examination. For Dollar specifically, the outcome was a quiet victory. No punishment, no disclosure, and the ministry's records remained exactly as sealed as they had always been. What that secrecy looked like from the outside became clearer through organizations that specialized in evaluating religious nonprofits. Ministry Watch, an independent group that reviews Christian ministries for donors, awarded Creflo Dollar Ministries a grade of F for financial transparency, the lowest possible rating, specifically because the ministry declined to provide financial information to any independent audit process. An F from Ministry Watch was not a minor notation. It was a signal to any serious donor that this organization had decided transparency was not worth the trouble. Meanwhile, the assets that Dollar accumulated through his ministry became increasingly visible, even if the accounting behind them stayed hidden. He owned multiple high-end properties, including a $1 million home in Atlanta and a home in Demarest, New Jersey, valued at $2.5 million. A Manhattan apartment purchased for $2.5 million in 2006 was later sold for $3.75 million in 2012. He maintained 2 Rolls-Royces. He traveled on a private jet that the ministry owned and operated. His personal salary was never disclosed, And every time the question came up in interviews or investigations, the answer was silence, deflection, or legal argument. The machinery behind these assets was the same machinery that Dollar's sermons powered each week. Congregation members who gave faithfully based on his teachings about tithing and financial blessing were funding a lifestyle that existed in a world entirely separate from their own. The theology promised that giving would produce personal abundance for the giver. In practice, the most visible abundance resided with the pastor at the front of the room. Grassley's investigation had cracked a window into that reality, but the window was slammed shut before anyone could look through it properly. The pattern of behavior that emerged across those years, the refusal to cooperate, the deflection to other agencies, the maintenance of sealed finances while operating a multi-million-dollar tax-exempt organization, left a lasting stain on the ministry's reputation that no sermon series could fully erase.
The $65 million jet and the daughter arrest when the walls came down.
What the Senate investigation could not fully expose, a pair of explosive public incidents managed to bring directly into the open. Two separate moments, years apart, peeled back the layers of the ministry's carefully maintained image and showed the public a side of Creflo Dollar that no Sunday morning broadcast ever would have chosen to reveal. The first came in June 2012, when the Fayette County, Georgia, Sheriff's Office arrested Dollar following an alleged domestic incident involving his then 15-year-old daughter. Dollar was accused of choking and punching the girl, and the account was corroborated by his older daughter, with Fayette County Police subsequently releasing details of a 911 call made by one of the children. He was charged with simple battery and cruelty to children, charges serious enough to generate national headlines and immediate damage to the image of a pastor who built his platform on family values and divine favor. Dollar denied the allegations and remained defiant in public statements during the period following the arrest. He addressed his congregation and positioned the incident as an attack on his ministry, rather than a matter requiring personal accountability. The charges were eventually dismissed in January 2013 after Dollar completed a court-ordered anger management program. No conviction resulted, but the arrest record, the 911 call, and the public testimony of his own daughters ensured that the story did not disappear quietly from the public consciousness. What that incident exposed was not just a single evening's behavior, but the gap between the image Dollar had constructed and the reality that existed behind it. A man who stood before tens of thousands weekly and spoke with authority about righteous living, family, and divine blessing had been handcuffed in his own home following a confrontation with his teenage child. The dissonance was impossible to miss. 3 years later, the second incident arrived, and this one produced a different kind of damage. In March 2015, Dollar's ministry launched a crowdfunding campaign called Project G650, asking 200,000 supporters worldwide to each donate at least $300 toward the purchase of a Gulfstream G650 private jet valued at $65 million. A nearly 6-minute video was uploaded to the Creflo Dollar Ministries website, explaining the need for the aircraft and detailing the math of the campaign. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Social media responses ranged from disbelief to open mockery. News outlets across the country picked up the story within days. Critics who had spent years watching Dollar accumulate luxury assets while keeping his ministry's finances sealed saw the jet campaign as the clearest possible proof of what the prosperity gospel actually produced. The page was taken down within days of its launch, not because Dollar believed the request was inappropriate, but because the scale of the public criticism made continuation untenable. Dollar addressed the backlash in a sermon at World Changers Church International, telling his congregation that the devil was attempting to discredit him through the controversy. He told his followers that the criticism was an attack on his mission, rather than a legitimate response to a staggering request. The ministry's board later released a formal statement confirming its intention to acquire a Gulfstream G650 regardless of the campaign's cancellation, describing the aircraft as necessary for the ministry's global outreach, and calling it a reflection of the level of excellence at which the organization chose to operate. The statement offered little comfort to the millions who had watched the campaign unfold. A ministry that declined to share its financial records with the United States Senate was simultaneously asking ordinary followers to pool $300 apiece toward a jet that billionaires put themselves on waiting lists to acquire. The image was not one that any public relations effort could soften quickly. Taken together, the 2012 arrest and the 2015 jet campaign represented the two most damaging moments in Dollar's public history. Both incidents brought external examination that the ministry could not simply dismiss through legal filings or sermon reframing. Both confirmed, in different ways, that the world inside Dollar's study looked very different from the world his broadcasts projected every day of the week. The tithing reversal and what it means for everything he built. Having arrived at the final chapter of this story, it is worth sitting with a moment that carries more weight than any single controversy that came before it. In June 2022, Creflo Dollar stood before his congregation at World Changers Church International and did something that almost no prosperity gospel pastor in his position had ever done. He told his followers that decades of his most foundational teaching had been wrong. In a sermon titled The Great Misunderstanding, delivered on June 26, 2022, Dollar publicly renounced his long-held position that tithing was a mandatory obligation for New Testament Christians. For decades, his ministry had taught that giving 10% of one's income to the church was not optional but required, and that failure to do so carried spiritual consequences, while faithful giving produced financial blessing. That teaching was the bedrock on which his congregation's giving patterns, and by extension his ministry's revenue, had been built. Dollar told his congregation that he was still growing, and that the teachings he had shared in the past on tithing were not correct. He argued that tithing is an Old Testament legal requirement that does not apply to believers living under the new covenant established by Jesus Christ. In a moment that made international headlines across Christian media, he advised his congregation to throw away every book, every tape, and every video he had ever produced on the subject of tithing. The reversal was total. The reaction across religious communities was immediate and divided. Some pastors and theologians praised Dollar for the courage it took to publicly correct decades of teaching. Others questioned the motivation, wondering aloud whether the reversal reflected genuine theological growth or a strategic repositioning of his ministry's brand. Critics noted with pointed accuracy that Dollar had spent years building enormous personal wealth and a multi-million-dollar ministry on a doctrine he was now calling incorrect. The implications of that retraction could not be overstated. Every book sold, every sermon preached, every offering plate passed on the basis of mandatory tithing represented a transaction built on teaching that Dollar himself eventually labeled false. The followers who gave sacrificially over those years, sometimes at real financial cost to themselves and their families, did so based on theological instruction that their pastor now admitted had been wrong. What made the retraction particularly striking was that it arrived in the same decade as heightened public scrutiny of prosperity theology across American Christianity. Documentaries, investigative journalism, and former congregants speaking publicly had all contributed to a cultural moment where the financial practices of televangelists faced more critical attention than at any point since Grassley's 2007 investigation. Dollar's reversal landed inside that climate and drew a different kind of reader than it might have attracted 10 years earlier. The question that lingered was not whether the theological change was genuine. Dollar had clearly moved away from mandatory tithing as a theological position. The deeper question was about accountability. If the teaching was wrong for all those years, what did that mean for the institution built on it? What did it mean for the followers who gave beyond their means because Dollar told them it was spiritually required? Those questions did not come with simple answers, and the ministry offered none. By 2026, estimates of Dollar's personal net worth placed him in a range that most sources identified as somewhere between $27 and $30 million, with some estimates running higher based on total assets, including real estate and ministry holdings. The World Dome still stands in College Park, Georgia. Changing Your World still broadcasts. The ministry that began with 8 people in a school cafeteria in 1986 continues to operate at scale. But what the story of Creflo Dollar ultimately reveals is something that goes beyond one pastor's personal decisions. It is a story about the gap between public theology and private practice, about the structures that allow enormous financial empires to grow inside religious exemptions with almost no accountability to the people who fund them, and about what happens when the teaching at the center of a ministry is eventually revealed to be something the teacher no longer believes. If you made it this far, thank you for staying with us through this one. Stories like this one matter not because they are about tearing anyone down, but because understanding what happens inside powerful institutions is part of how we protect ourselves and the people we care about. If this video opened your eyes to something you had not considered before, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because this conversation is worth having. Hit the subscribe button if you want more videos that go beneath the surface and stay there until the truth comes up. We will see you in the next one.